Welcome to Shaped by Faith with your host, Theresa Rowe. To find out more about Shaped by Faith and Theresa Rowe, please visit shapedbyfaith.com or visit the YouTube channel, Facebook, or Instagram. And now, here is Theresa Rowe.
Welcome to Shaped by Faith, where we shape our bodies and hearts for God's purposes. I have a very special guest on Shaped by Faith. She's been on one other time. Her name is Amanda Schaefer. She has an amazing podcast called A Cup of Gratitude. She is an author. She's a speaker. She does so much, but more than anything, she loves Jesus and she loves to help people. She carries with her the goodness of looking through a lens of gratitude. I love that about her and her podcast. You know, her podcast reaches over 112 countries and 3,000 cities, and that's a real big deal. As a speaker, Amanda teaches the Bible while challenging audiences to live the way God intends. And she's got a way of making scripture just come alive through everyday examples. She's written a lot of books, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but I want to thank you, Amanda, for being a guest on Shaped by Faith.
Hi, thanks for having me back, Theresa. I'm really excited to talk with you again.
I'm excited about your new book, and we're going to get into that. So I'm so excited about that. And gosh, you have found so much success in your podcast. Congratulations. And we're going to get into that, a little bit later. But before all that, let's just give a refresher, like on your background. Tell us what you were doing before starting your own podcast.
Sure. Well, I had written 2 books and published them. I was starting to speak. I was doing a lot of women's ministry inside and outside of the church. And I felt God asking me to go take care of my parents. They lived in a 1600s farmhouse where I grew up, not very far away. And so I ended up moving to take care of them. And about a week after I moved in, the world shut down, and I understood why God kind of prepared me to get over there. So during the pandemic, I was cut off because I was taking care of them from doing all of those things. I really thought I had been doing what God had for me, but you know how that often changes and becomes new. So I was serving my parents quietly for about a year. And all of a sudden, one day I just said, you know what, God, I'll do this as long as you want me to do it. I don't mind serving them and being kind of shut off, but I do feel this ache in my soul that I'm not sharing the gospel. I want to share the gospel. Well, I had never even listened to a podcast. And the next thing I knew, I was buying a microphone online and converting an old closet. And so the podcast was born. And during this time where everything was shut off and I was so secluded, God took me all over the world and connected me to people so that I could share about his goodness. And so after the pandemic kind of pulled back a little bit, I was able to start writing again. I had a lot of writing opportunities. And so now I'm doing a little bit of everything.
And you are very busy and very
I am.
successful. Amanda, you have an amazing attitude. You've got an attitude of gratitude. Have you always had that? Does that come easy for you?
I have not always had it. I like to remind people that it's a discipline and it's a choice. So I actually learned to develop um, that practice of gratitude during one of the most difficult times in my life. And I realized that I had a choice to make. I could either look at my circumstances or I could look at God. And no matter what my circumstances were, God is always good. And there are always good things around. And the way that God's created our neural network in our brain is that the more we choose something, whether it's good or whether it's bad, the more we choose it, it creates this deepened roadway through our brain, right? And it makes it expect it for more of the same. So when you choose to be positive, when you choose to look for good things, you become expectant for more good things.
Absolutely. I tell my fitness students, your body craves what you give it, good, bad, ugly, but that's also emotionally, spiritually, physically, whatever that is. So, a cup of gratitude is, gosh, being heard all over the world. And isn't that amazing how God just had people start reaching out to you and here it expands out worldwide. So I know you're excited about that, and I cannot wait to see what God is going to do with your podcast even more. And I
Mhm.
think it was really brave and obedient of you to step out into an arena that you had no clue in how to even do it. And I think that's
Mhm.
when God does his best work, when we have
Absolutely.
not a clue. All right, so you started the podcast. Why did you
Mhm.
choose the topic gratitude?
Well, I didn't start it on my own. It was an outpouring of my time with God. And so when I decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do, he became part of every part of it. And I actually do my podcast very differently. I start in people's childhoods and I work up to what they're doing now so that people can see the threads and the themes of God in every single story. So it was God's idea to call it a cup of gratitude. It came to me during journaling time and time spent with God, listening really clearly for what He wanted me to do. Since I had no idea what I was doing, I really had to turn to Him, and I was, cut off in the middle of a pandemic. I really didn't have any other resources, and so I believe that what He wanted me to do was to let people in on during a really difficult time that there are still good things and that they just need to get that perspective shift. They need to
Mhm.
pivot and look around. And sometimes you actually have to go to a different place. Sometimes you're inside, something's happening, you need to get outside. You need to look at creation, or sometimes you're with someone and you're having difficulty in that particular conversation. You need to kind of get away. And I think a lot of times just that intentionality helps
Mhm.
us look for the good and find it.
Absolutely. You posed a question, what's in your cup? Can you expand upon that and what that means?
Yeah, so it's kind of like became my tagline. Again, I had no idea what I was doing, but in the very beginning, you have to make an intro and an outro to have on both ends of your podcast. And so I was trying to figure out what it is I wanted to say. And I thought about the old adage, your cup is half empty or your cup is half full, and how people have this different perspective shift. And what God said to me was, yeah, but Amanda, what matters is what's in your cup. And
Mhm.
of course, the cup is our heart.
Yeah.
But what's in there? And I think a lot of times, even just a little bit of something good is a lot better than a full cup of anything else.
So how important is it for us to know what's in our cup? And let's say a person's listening, they're like, I have no clue, what's in my cup. I mean,
Mhm.
how would you direct them?
I would say it's pretty simple. What spills out of you when you get knocked into, when life is hard, when things aren't going exactly how you plan for them to go, when you get knocked into what spills out, that's what's in your cup. And,
Mhm.
as Christians, there's the fruit of the Spirit. Well, there are negative fruits growing in our soil and our heart as well. And so, as we try to get more and more like Jesus and spend more and more time intimately with God, that's when what's in our cup becomes something more useful, something more good. And what spills out ends up being an overflow of our time with Him.
I love that. And when you were explaining before about a cup of gratitude and what brought you to that topic, I love that you said it's also a discipline. It's
Yeah.
something that, like you said, we have to be intentional with because
Mhm.
our body will follow whichever way we're thinking, whichever way we're going. So it is a discipline, just reminding yourself, but then it becomes part of who you are,
Yeah.
that cup of gratitude. I love that as well. So, what are some things you've learned since starting, your own podcast? Gosh, what year was that when you started your podcast?
It'll be 4 years on the 23rd of January in a week.
Okay. So what are some, we've only got a minute left in this segment, but we can carry it
Sure.
over in the next.
Sure. So I would say one of the biggest things I learned how to do was to listen well with God when someone else is talking, to prayerfully listen. I always invite God into every conversation, but to pull back with Him as someone's sharing their story and look from His kingly heavenly perspective at what they're talking about. And when I do that, I'm able to pull out things that they've never even seen themselves, things that they never noticed were in their story, and they're able to be blessed by their own story.
That's so good. It has so many interesting guests on. how do you incorporate your faith into your podcast?
Honestly, the question would be, how do I not? I mean, again, this is an overflow ministry of something where I said to God, I want to share about you. And he said, hey, let's try this.
Mhm.
So I think the number one way that I incorporate my faith is that I do start in the beginning so that we can look at people's lives and see where God was working. Because most of the time, not everyone started out with the faith. I didn't. I came to Christ 23 years ago. I'm 60. Do the math. I spent more of my life not believing really in God than believing in Him. And so I think by bringing Him in, another thing is I pray before we record, and I literally invite Him in to be in charge, even though I've prepared questions and we've talked before and done a pre-recording phone call to get to know one another and get to know the story. We ask God to be in the lead, and we
Mhm.
ask Him to be the one. If there's something we're going to talk about He doesn't want us to talk about, drop something in our spirit and we will go. And that really has been the biggest faith piece, is allowing Him to be the one in charge.
That's so good. And his will be done. I mean, every
Mhm.
single day with everything that we're doing.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of your favorite podcasts that you've recorded so far. I'm sure you have a few.
Well, I mean, I've recorded more than 200 episodes and that have been published, and I have recorded about another 30 or so that haven't gone out yet. So that was a really hard call. I would say, instead of telling you my favorites, I would say my favorite thing. My
Okay.
favorite thing is when I'm in there, I'm sitting there with a pen and paper in the podcast booth, really listening, leaning in with God. And when God points something out to me in their story that we haven't talked about before and is really, really pivotal, and I ask them a question about it or show them that. And what unfolds out of that, like I said, is that blessing. God has a blessing in every one of these conversations for the people who are sharing and for the people who are listening.
Mhm.
And there's probably so many we'll never know. So I think my favorite thing is being able to offer back to somebody something beautiful for them to take away and remember, kind of as their Ebenezer stone. Oh, wow, look at what God did. I didn't even know He was doing that. I didn't even know He was there.
Do you offer a variety of guests, or how do you find your guests for your podcast?
Well, I don't find them, they find me. That is the one thing I said to God. The one caveat was, I don't know enough people. So I said, God, would you please bring them to me? And it's crazy. I am booked with people all the way through the end of 2025. They just keep coming. So I'm trying to keep up with them. And I love sharing everything from someone who's really well known to someone who doesn't even have an Instagram, because every single story is valuable. I want to get as many of those stories out there as I can because they carry the story of God.
Mhm. How often do you record? Do you have a weekly or daily or
I honestly, every day it seems like I'm recording
wow?
something.
Okay. Amanda, when did you notice your podcast started to take off, like, and reach a broader audience? And you're like, wow, God. I mean, when did that start happening for you?
I think it was about the end of the first year. I was so excited in the beginning that anybody was listening. I really wasn't after numbers. I was after
Mhm.
genuine connection.
Yes.
And so when I started noticing that the numbers were taking off and it was going in different countries and people were sharing with other people, it was really exciting. So I would say about a year in, and it's just been exponential since then. I don't know how God's doing it, and it's completely Him. That's the thing. I started the podcast in a closet in an old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere during a pandemic, right? And so we have to give all of the glory to God for taking it where He wants it to go.
Absolutely. What's some of the feedback that you've heard from your listeners?
It's really humbling to get that feedback, and I would say it's not what I would have expected, but apparently I make people feel safe to
Mm,
share difficult things.
mhm.
And the other thing is, supposedly I have a really easy voice to listen to. I don't think any of us really like our own voice, but apparently my voice seems to be something that listeners really enjoy and helps bring down the walls, that it somehow conveys the actual heart behind who I am. I don't know how God does that.
But he does.
Yes,
That's all we
yes.
need to know. Do you have any inspirational story you would like to share? It could be about anything.
Oh my gosh. I mean, how long do you have? Not that long. I would say if I had to pick something right now, it would be the fact that I'm doing this at all. Like I said, 23 years ago, not only was I not going to church, reading the Bible, or paying attention to God, I was actually kind of making fun of people who did that. And I really went through some traumatic things in my life. I now understand why I didn't think God was a good guy. I think I was angry. The mere fact that I was quiet, depressed, and a pretty bitter person, and now you cannot stop me talking about Jesus. You know, you can't take the joy out of my countenance or off of my face. I think for me, that's the biggest miracle, that God continues to work in me and that He uses me at all. That blows me away. The fact that he's using me to share about him makes no sense to me. It's a God thing.
It is a God thing, and you're being obedient to his calling. And you said, "Yes, God, here we go." And
Mhm.
so it's amazing. I know that our obedience brings blessings, and that's evidence in your life and in what you're doing right now. When speaking and listening to others, what do you notice that people struggle with the most?
Hearing God.
Mm,
Hearing God. And the thing that I would say, and that I do say to a lot of people, is this: you're not listening long enough. I think a lot of times we're talking and we think we're listening, but we're not. We're
mm,
talking and we're not really listening. And we can hear God in many ways. We can hear him in scripture, we can hear him in creation, we can hear him in our spirit, but God is always speaking. I like to give this example. If you were to draw a line and you were to put some dots on that line, and you were to say that those dots were the times that you heard God, you would think that's when God's speaking. But God is the line. He's always
mm.
talking. So it's this matter of us really turning and intentionally listening. And you have to listen longer than you think is long enough.
That's right. Well, how did you learn to listen to God, Amanda?
When I came to Christ, it was such a really, like, Damascus Road experience. I was completely different and I wanted to know everything. So
Mm,
I was constantly looking in the Bible, asking questions, and just eager to know about the kingdom of God and know about his ways. And so I think I started listening more because I just wanted to sit at the feet of Jesus. I just wanted to learn. And I think it became part of my everyday stature when I get together with him.
we've got a lot in common. That's one of the things right there. When I became a Christian, same thing. Why do you
Mm.
think so many people struggle looking through the lens of gratitude?
Because life's hard.
Amen to
Life is
that.
life's hard, and it is a choice, like I said before. And so I think that's the big perspective shift, that you can change the way you feel about what's happening based on what you look at, what you focus on. And when we take the time to focus on the good, it really can change the way that we are. It's not going to change our situation, but it's going to change our heart.
Absolutely. And then you're going to move in the direction of the Lord as you follow him. So, Amanda, you've just written a book. So, before we get into that, where did your love for writing come from?
Well, I have to say, when I was little, I was pretty gregarious, and supposedly, not only did I write a book that my mom kept and actually gave to me, that had like the colored paper on the outside stapled, I had a cover, the whole thing, but I was always kind of climbing up on things and doing little plays. I was always just sharing stories somehow. So I think that my love of the way we can share a story, even the lyrical sound of words and how they're put together, and how we can bring somebody in and show them what we experienced, is just something that's always been with me.
That's a passion, and God put that in you, and it's a gifting for sure. So, let's talk about your new book. What's the name of it? And tell us about it.
I haven't told anyone the name yet. I'm waiting
Okay.
until we've gotten it to the publisher, just
Okay.
because
Sure.
That's where we're at. But it is something that came out as an overflow from the podcast. And I wasn't expecting this at all. I was not trying to write a new book. I was in
Mhm.
some collaborative books that I had the time for, and I had somebody on the podcast as a guest who happened to work at a publishing company. And I just mentioned really in a short little sentence something about what I was working on. And when we got done, she said, "Hey, do you have a publisher for that book?" And I said, I haven't even written the book proposal yet." And she said, "Well, write it. And when you do, send it to me." I sent it to her, and the next thing I know, I was signing a contract to write the book. The reason why I think I'm doing this book is because this is what God wanted me to do. I cannot share enough stories in the way I'm going with the podcast. I have them all lined up, like I said, all the way to the end of the year, but I can only get one out a week. And so the concept of this book is, as I told you in the podcast, I start in our childhood and move up to what people are doing now. So we look at my life in the part one of the book from childhood up to what's going on now. And then the second part is an interactive journal with pivotal questions that I've learned how to compose because of doing the podcast for 4 years, where I am able to bring the reader through kind of like a pre recording phone call for them to sit with God and look at the things that they might have missed in their story and to learn their story, their whole story, to see where God was and to be able to maybe get a little bit of healing, have a little forgiveness, a little bit of growth, and then to be able to share that whole story with others. Because when we share a story, that's how we share about God.
Mm. Is it coming out this year, Amanda?
Yeah, it's due to be out in early April 2025, and I'm very excited because I know God asked me to do this. Hasn't been easy trying to get it done so quickly, but here we are. I am every time I get the edits back, I do them and throw them back at the publisher. We're almost there.
That's wonderful. So, what are your hopes, for readers? Like, as they read your manuscript, what do you hope they take away from it?
Well, I had a difficult life, and when you meet me now, you wouldn't think I went through some of the things I went through when I was
Mhm.
younger. And so I hope that the first part of the book brings down people's walls in that I've been vulnerable enough to show you where God came in and met me in all of these places and how he was long suffering and waited for me to finally accept him. And then the second part of the book, what I hope for is for people to sit down with God and be able to grab a pen and work through this journal and be blessed by their story and get closer to God and understand that He has a purpose and a calling for every single person. It's unique. We need to hear every story because your story is going to reach people. Mine will reach people. Yours won't. And I think what God's trying to do with our stories is cast a net over the world so that we can go into all the world and reach them, but there's holes in the net. People aren't
Mhm.
sharing either because they don't know it, they don't feel confident about it, and so my hope is that people are going to come out of this feeling confident to share their story, feeling blessed by their story and being closer to God.
That's so good. And it's so freeing, Amanda, when someone's vulnerable and they share their story and it's out there. When I've shared my story before, I thought people can say whatever they want to say, but it's
Yeah.
my story and I'm going to share it and here it is. And there's
Mhm.
just something about it.
Yeah.
It's like the weight kind of comes off the shoulders a little bit when you give yourself permission to share. If
Yeah.
someone's listening and they're really struggling with this cup of gratitude and I have a horrible life, and what are
Mhm.
some simple steps that you would suggest to them to start with?
Well, the first thing I noticed in this gratitude journey was when I first wake up in the morning, it might not come out of my mouth, but I grumble. In my head, I grumble, oh, it's cold. I don't want to walk the dog. It's dark outside, whatever. And so, what I've learned to do is before my feet hit the ground, I pull back and I stop and I intentionally pick a few things to thank God for out loud that I have. There are people that want what I have. There are
Mhm.
people who are praying for what I already have, and I think sometimes we get jumbled and we don't think that we have all that we need or all that we deserve. And when we stop and we're grateful for the things we do have, we begin to understand how much we have. And then simple things, use your senses. look around. What can I see that I can be grateful for? What can I hear? What can I smell? Like, what can I eat? Do I have a dog that I can pet that makes me feel good and feel loved? Our senses ground us. And so if you could just pick a couple of your senses and find something to be grateful for, the last thing would be write it down. When you write it down, if you get to a time where you can't look around and come up with something, you can pull that out and you can look at that and remind yourself, yes, there are good things.
Thank you so much. Amanda, I love talking with you and I love listening to you. So I'm just so thankful God connected our path. And so we're going to have to check out your book when it comes out. So where can we find it, the information about it?
Sure. Well, I have acupofgratitude.org is my website, or you can follow me on any social media platform. I am everywhere. I'm even on TikTok, which if it's still around, I will still be there. And I will have everything there, but yeah, it'll be available everywhere, and I'll be sure to let everyone know.
Okay. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you for listening. I'm Theresa Rowe. Everyone have a blessed day. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Shaped by Faith with Theresa Rowe. Remember to visit shapedbyfaith.com to find out more about workouts, the TV show, podcasts, blogs, Shaped by Faith products, and much more.